Hey everybody, it's Josh. I wanted to talk today about how men and women should act and how Christ teaches us to act. The Sermon on the Mount was the greatest ethical teachings of all time. A Harvard professor said that all ethical teachings were just a footnote to the Sermon on the Mount. Christ tells us that the meek shall inherit the earth. Now, what does that mean? Before I really came to Christ and understood, I just thought that it's weakness. I interchanged meekness with weakness. But nothing can be farther from the truth. Meekness is strength. Meekness is knowing you have strength, yet still holding back. So you might know that you could beat the crap out of somebody, and they're just egging you on and just trying to get under your skin and just being an a-hole like many people are these days. I saw it a lot when I was younger, and drunken fights and just fights for no reason. Sometimes they were in good fun, but sometimes they were usually they were over a girl. But meekness is strength and knowing that you can persevere, but it's inner strength. And we see too many of these supposed alpha men who can't stand. We'll take Andrew Tate, for example. Now, I can't say much about him because I've never listened to him. I've only heard what has been reported on him, and obviously none of the reporting is good. But I did hear him talking about the Olympic opening ceremony, where it was just one insult for Christianity after another. And Andrew Tate, who is now apparently a Muslim, just said this is unacceptable, which really it is, but as a Christian, the unacceptable, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with the unacceptable all the time. Christ tells us that we must turn the other cheek. And that is, we can't fight back in retaliation, retribution, or revenge. We must stay our hand. We must turn that other cheek. And unless it's self-defense, unless somebody is just going to just beat us to death or beat some other innocent to death, a family member, they're breaking into your home, that is the only time we are called for justified violence. And too often, excuse me, all these rainstorms and hurricanes have just stirred up all the stuff in the air, so I'm dealing with all that stuff. But we have basically a culture where we love revenge. I've mentioned in a video a long time ago how I've read comic books growing up, and The Punisher was always one of my favorites. Rorschach from The Watchmen was always one of my favorites. And these men, although they're fictional, but they were celebrated because they got their revenge. As much as I love Mel Gibson movies and as great as they are, it is revenge he's seeking. And we're rooting for him because, of course, we want to root for, we'll take Braveheart, for instance. The British came and took the wives of the newlyweds and, had their way with them. And in that case, she was killed. Mel Gibson's William Wallace, it was his character. His wife was killed. And of course, he sought revenge. And you're just sitting there rooting for him because you're like, take down these monsters, take them down. Same with the Patriot. They killed his son. They killed two of his sons. If I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've watched it. But you're sitting there thinking, he was a peaceful man. He didn't want anything to do with fighting the British because he'd been in the heat of war so many times. And you just want him to take them down. Take them all down. Kill the evil man. Now, this is a complicated issue. Because what do you do with somebody like an Adolf from the 1930s Germany? War is a little bit different, but still, as Christians, we have to search our heart. We have to let the Holy Spirit discern whether we are running on vengeance or we are running on justice. And in the case of taking Adolf down, and then really in the case of Braveheart and the Patriot and so many wars, we were protecting innocence by going and killing the monster. So we have to work that out as a Christian. Where do we draw the line? And that's why there is always gray area. And it's never easy. Life is full of gray. But when you start seeking revenge and you just live to get vengeance on anyone who spites you, then it becomes a darkness in your heart. You have to learn forgiveness. Without forgiveness, it devours you. That hatred devours you. Now, this is not only, in these extreme situations. We see this with so many people now. I talk to men and sometimes women, but more so men, who cannot find a good woman in today's society, who cannot find someone who is especially a Christian. There is such corruption in this culture that everybody is sleeping around before marriage. Everybody is disregarding all of God's laws. And we just accept it because it is society. And it's a slippery slope because the more we accept, the more disturbing it gets. I've always been a libertarian from the time I was about 20 years old. And libertarians are, well, let's just say they're not really in touch with reality. Because libertarianism would be great if everybody could just leave everybody else alone. That would be amazing. But you just can't. That's not how the world works. People don't leave each other alone. The live and let live and live and let die is, well, basically, true evil thrives when strong men just ignore all the problems and just say, what's the quote from from after the Holocaust. You know, first they came for the Jews, and I wasn't Jewish, and you know, they came for the disabled, and I wasn't disabled, and people just let this stuff happen. People let these atrocities happen instead of standing up against them. But as a Christian, we must try first and foremost, as much as we can, to stop this darkness with peace and love. And we might be made a martyr. We might be like an MLK Jr. It's not going to ever be easy. Which is why people turn away from the church. Because they want easy. They want whatever makes them feel fulfilled in their desires and their worship of desires. You see, we'll go back to the old quote from David Foster Wallace, the atheist writer who wrote Infinite Jest, and he wrote a long couple of verses about how if we don't worship God, which he didn't, he was an atheist, we will end up worshiping something of this world and it will devour us. And that sums up so much of what we're taught in the Bible right there. We're going to worship something. I don't care what the atheists say, that they don't worship anything. They do. They absolutely do. They despise Christianity because mostly Christians are hypocrites. And maybe they've had parents that were abusive, or parents that didn't show any love to them. Or maybe they had some other figure in their life that they saw this from. Or maybe they just saw the standard depiction of a Christian and it just put a bad taste in their mouth. This is how atheism usually starts. And it could be their parents' generation or the generation above that, and they see this and they pass it down to their children. Because we don't take stock. They think that since we've discovered things in science, that it somehow discredits the Bible, which is absolutely ridiculous. I guess if you took a literal definition of everything in the Bible, which Genesis, a lot of it is supposed to be poetry, a lot of it is supposed to be metaphorical, a lot of it is just supposed to teach us a lesson. And we cling so tightly to it having to be literal. Like the world created in 6 days, and the universe created in 6 days. And on the seventh day, God took a rest. Well, there's been many times, I think it was a Psalms, and I can't remember the New Testament chapter, but both Christ and one of the Old Testament prophets said that God, time is irrelevant to him. You know, one day could be 1,000 years and vice versa. So we keep thinking, oh, it's literal days they're talking about, or it's literal. We think of everything in God's time on our time. God's time works on his time, which he's outside of space and time, which is why he always has perfect timing. I can tell you from how I was saved and the signs that I've gotten, the visions I've gotten, His timing is always incredible. If I wouldn't have been saved when I was, exactly when I was, I would have fallen apart. I wouldn't have been here standing strong, being a pillar for my family. I would have been devoured by the darkness. And that is one thing that we have to understand when we are dealing with the darkness and tragedy of this world. We are going to always feel like we're not good enough, like we're going to fail, like we are too weak. But the meekness, the meek who inherit the earth, the ones who are strong enough, the ones who have the power of the Holy Spirit and can stop tragedies, can stop all kinds of things if they truly put an effort into it. But they understand that that would be going against everything that God gave us that gift of the Holy Spirit for. He gave us the gift of the Holy Spirit to be a warrior of peace, to be a servant to others. And as much as we want to go out and fight, as much as we want to spite and smite the enemy, all it leads to is destruction, chaos, and sadness. And we will pay the price for that. You know, I think of the wisdom of man versus the wisdom of God. The wisdom of man, I think of King Solomon. God granted him the greatest wisdom of man. And it was exactly what Israel needed at the time to become a superpower, just completely, maybe the first big superpower, although there were probably a few others before them. But they were just revered or feared by all the surrounding countries and all their enemies and allies. But his wisdom was not enough to discern and to keep him from the desires that he was drawn into. He was, sorry, my daughter's peeking out at the window at me. Hi, little girl. That wisdom, the wisdom of man, it will seem like we are thriving when we have it. But unless we have the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, the wisdom of God, divine wisdom, it's going to turn on us. Because man's wisdom is nothing to God. God confuses man's wisdom all the time, just to teach us a lesson. Because we get arrogant, we get cocky, we think we know it all. You know, of course, King Solomon thought he knew it all. And so he was devoured by man's wisdom. He ended his life when he was turned away from God. I got my daughter looking at me one place and two dogs looking at me the other. Hey, pups. Hey, puppies. There's two Akitas over there at my neighbor's house. They're beautiful dogs. Oh. Anyways, my daughter's coming out, so I better end this now. But I wanted to say real quick that Paul's wisdom, he had the wisdom of man first, but then he got the wisdom of the Holy Spirit. And that's when he humbled himself. He humbled himself and he became truly wise. And that's what we should all be striving for. A humbleness, a meekness, turning the other cheek, and standing up for the innocent only when needed with violence. We stand up with peace and love. I love you all. God bless.